I want to officially welcome everyone for today's Unlock Your Mind session. Thank you all for being here. Our guest speaker's name is Dr. Bettina von Stam, a very special guest speaker. She is an original and visionary thinker, as well as a prolific writer in the fields of sustainability and innovation. Building her MBA and PhD from London Business School, she supports senior managers and innovation leaders in creating sustainable innovation organizations. She will be joining us today to discuss why we need to learn to embrace paradoxes. Very interesting. Welcome, Bettina.
Thank you very much indeed, Paloma. Well, it is most certainly my great pleasure to be with you, even though I can't see any of you because the way the technology determines what I can and can't do on my computer at the moment. I can only share my slides and I can't see you at the same time. So slightly strange situation. And if I sometimes look a bit puzzled, that might be why, because I'm just staring at my own slides, which is unusual. And maybe a suggestion from my side, if you are at the other end, it might be a great idea to mute yourself, because the popping of the drinks can just now made me very thirsty. I can't get up and get myself a drink. Thank you very much for that. Indeed, so what I'd like to talk about is why we need to forget about either or, which we seem to prefer, and learn to embrace paradoxes. Before I do that, I thought I'd give you a little bit of an introduction about myself, which also links into why I've come to this particular conclusion. So I started my journey, my professional life, with a compromise, and a compromise gone wrong as such, when I decided to start study architecture and town planning, which I thought might be a combination of fashion design and computer science. Realizing that it wasn't so, I still finished my degree as quickly as I possibly could, and I've taken one important interest out of my first degree, and that is that I've always been interested in seeing the big picture, as well as understanding the small details of things. As I realized that my first degree hadn't really given me the tools that would inspire me and enable a passionate and happy professional life, I made myself hunt for a different set of tools, and I found these in an MBA program at London Business School. And when I decided to leave Germany, which was back in 1990, in Germany no one had ever heard about MBWatt, and I thought that might be a fantastic opportunity for me to acquire a whole new skill set. Once I finished, I decided that I didn't want a job that I didn't want again. So I started to do project-based work. And it was the project-based work that then also created the desire to create a deeper level of expertise and acquire more wisdom that would give people a reason to seek out me to do their projects rather than anyone else, which meant I went back to London Business School to do my PhD. And the glorious title of my PhD was The Effects of Context and Complexity in New Product Development. One of the key things that was the result of my PhD was when I started off looking at processes in order to understand why new product development projects would work or not work, I very quickly came to the realization that it is not enough to look at the process itself, but I really needed to expand my view and consider the entire organization. How does leadership influence it? How does remuneration and rewards influence behavior in organizations? Is new product development really embedded in the strategy and all such things? So I quickly realized how important the context in which something happens actually is. From there, I was moving deeper, or my PhD work also brought me deeper into the topic of innovation. And one of the things I have to confess that when I started, I was one of these people who would jump up and down and say, everyone needs to become more creative and innovative, until I realized that actually not all of us enjoy that. Some of us are more reserved. Some of us prefer things the way they are. They don't want constant change. And this is when also an earlier project of mine to look into Darwin and his work came back to me. And I realized that there is a reason for the Darwin finches. You might know about them, that there's a whole group of finches. Each of them has developed a special area of expertise. So each have their niche on how they acquire their food and the way they live, so that they don't stand in constant competition with each other. And I realized sort of there was an insight for innovation around here as well, because in innovation, if everyone is crazy about new ideas and constantly creative, nothing will ever get done. And hence what we need in innovation is diversity, people with different skill and different mindsets. And when I went deeper into that, I also realized that actually, while all organizations were saying that they want innovation, when I went in to talk to them about it and challenge them, I realized that a lot of them said they really want innovation, but when it came to making it happen, that was quite a different matter. And that's one of the moments where I also realized the fact that we'll have to learn to deal with paradoxes, because on the one hand, they say they want innovation, and on the other hand, they focus on operational excellence. And let me just, now it's difficult, it would be nice to be able to see you and ask you the question whether you actually think there is conflict between focusing on innovation and focusing on operational excellence. I can't do that now, and I'll come back to that later as one of my paradoxes that I'd like to discuss. But first, might be helpful to say paradox, what is actually the definition? And that's a sort of very simple definition. A paradox is a statement or concept that contains conflicting ideas. Now, why do I think it is time just now to talk about paradoxes? I think one of the things for me is the wider context in which all of us operate. And what do I mean by that? With that, I mean that we've been very successful in polluting the elements that we as humanity depend upon, whether it's the soil, the air, or the water. There also seem to be some paradoxical things going on, where some of humanity die from starvation, the other part struggles with obesity. And the same is true, while some have far too much, other ones have far too little. How can that be? And of course, the fact that some people have too much and other one have too little leads easily to aggression and conflict, be it in wars or through terrorism. And all of that, of course, we know has led to some significant climate change. I think no year has brought that in front of us so drastically as this year, with all the bushfires and the floods and the hurricanes that we've experienced. And of course, not to forget why we are not being able to be in the same room together, the coronavirus. So these are some significant, huge challenges to humanity that characterize our 21st century. What I believe is driving this, some underlying drivers for the conditions that we experience, are probably best explained in two slides. The first one, which some of you might be familiar with, is from the WWF, and it's also sometimes referred to as the hockey stick graph. What you can see here, at least I hope you can, is are the two axes. On the bottom axis, we've got the Human Development Index, which is a reflection for the degree of education in a country, for the infant mortality rate and such like. And on the vertical axis, you've got something that's called the ecological footprint. And I suspect that many of you will be familiar with the concept of the ecological footprint. It basically gives an idea how many resources a person or a country consumes compared to the resources that are available. And if you look at the graph, you can see circles of different size and different color. And each of these circles signifies a particular country. And the size of the circle signifies the population in that country. So the two big yellow circles that you can see towards the bottom are India and China. And the slightly bigger red one, the furthest one to the right and up, that's the United States. And then you also see a little light green colored rectangle at the bottom right of the graph. And that actually is the place where all nations ought to be if we were truly believing in that every human being on our planet has equal rights to the resources that our planet has to offer. And as you can clearly see, not a single country is in there. So what does it actually mean? What it actually means is that we are living far beyond the means of our planet. Actually this year it was, I think it was a date in August, where we had consumed all the resources that the planet can reproduce within a year. So we started from August onwards, we have started to borrow from our future, or probably from our children's future. And one of the challenging things about this is also that it is actually a particular trend, a particular direction in which all countries seem to go, and that is from the bottom left to the top right. And of course, given that we have one planet and one planet only, whatever people think about moving to Mars is that we need to find solutions on how to address these challenges. The second thing that is also an underlying driver for the conditions that we experience is the fact that change, the rate at which change has been introduced, has increased dramatically over the last, well, basically, literally, since the beginning of this millennium. And again, I hope that you can read the numbers on the graph. It basically looks at the rate at which change in certain topics has been introduced from 2000, not 20,000, 2000 BC to 2000 AD. And you can see whether it was military technology, communication technology, or even human awareness or leadership assumptions. They seem to have at a steady pace and in parallel with each other. And what happened around the turn of the millennium is that the rate at which change has been introduced has increased exponentially. And there's one thing which I could talk about for an hour on its own, but which I will not do, but I'd like to point out is the fact that one of these areas that have been investigated, leadership assumptions, has a very interesting trend. And that is that the way we think about leadership, the way we believe leadership should be done, is continuing on the old trajectory. Now, I will leave you with the question what you think happens when an entire system moves in one direction and one aspect of that system moves in a different direction. I hope you will come to the conclusion that I have come, is that it will not work. So clearly, leadership, how we think about leadership, how leadership works, is an area we need to think about. But fundamentally, these things, the constraint on our resources, on our planet's resources, in combination with the increased rate of change, are the driving conditions. And of course, all of that has been facilitated by the World Wide Web, by connectivity. What was previously available in a small geographical area is now within an instant available throughout the world. And as innovation happens when connecting different bodies of knowledge, that perhaps is also an explanation why change has exploded, because as I always like to say, all innovation is change, even though not all change might be innovation. So where does that leave us? If change in the past might have looked like this, sort of a fairly flat curve, and the thing about the fairly flat curve is that whichever aspect of the curve you're at, it might seem it's linear. And if you look at economic models, so many of them are based on linear assumptions. They are based on the assumption that you can predict the future based on behavior in the past. And of course, that is not always true. But whereas the rate of change that we've experienced in the past has allowed us to make that assumption, what we're experiencing today makes it impossible, because the rate of change, the fluctuation, is so high that wherever we are on the curve, we can no longer assume that the past is a good predictor for the future. And so this means we are having to deal with paradoxes. Whereas in the past, it was okay to deal with one thing first and then shift to another, which is why we also have been talking about the pendulum effect. Organizations were centralized and then they were decentralized. They were focusing on innovation and excellence, and then they were focusing on operational excellence. That is no longer possible. I don't know whether any of you are interested in quantum physics and know about Schrödinger's cat. It's basically that Schrödinger Schrödinger, sorry, it was just slightly, I can hear, I think someone's got the microphone on. Thank you, because then I can hear my own voice with a slight delay, which is slightly confusing. So Schrödinger's cat, where he basically said, if you've got a cat in a box, you don't know whether the cat is alive or dead. So both states are possible, and they are only observed, or they can only be verified by the observer by interacting with that state. And so basically, until we observe, there is this it's the possibility for death or life is both real. And so that is, it's holding this particular paradox. So what are the paradoxes that I observe in the particular context of the world of business? And why, probably more importantly, why do I think that it might be, that paradoxes might be a challenge? In order to explore that, I'd like to pose the first observation, which is that I very much believe that, not least due to our education, certainly in the early years, we have been conditioned to believe that there is one right answer. When you start going to school, that tends to be actually even true, because you're being taught the basics. The problem is that we are becoming so familiar with the search and the existence of one right answer that it is deeply embedded in our brain, and we no longer challenge it. And those of us who might have been a little bit awkward at school by asking a lot of questions probably have the price of being ridiculed for it, being asked to be, or being told that we are too slow or too difficult or not getting it. And so all this negative feedback, if we are proposing alternative answers, alternative scenarios, definitely helps to condition us to believe that there is one right answer. And actually, if you think about it, if we believe that there is one right answer, it should not come as a surprise that a lot of people don't quite like change, because that seems to imply that what we've done up to date is wrong. Because if we are asked to change something, and if there is one right way of doing it, then that is probably the only possible answer. One way to address that challenge is to understand that whatever was right yesterday might no longer be right today, not because it's wrong, but because the context in which we operate has changed. And so we need to find what's the best possible solution or the best possible approach, given a particular context and given a particular point in time. So this is the first challenge that we encounter when we want to embrace paradoxes. There is a second and probably even more difficult challenge, and that is the way that our brain organizes information. Our brain aims to be as energy efficient as possible. It's got a certain amount of energy to do all the jobs that need doing, and so it tries to find ways to maximize the use of its energy, of its electrons. And so in order to become very efficient, it groups things that are similar into little boxes, literally, in our brain. And so therefore, as our brain likes to organize things in boxes so that we encounter something similar, we don't need to spend a lot of energy trying to understand what it is, but we can take it and put it in one of the boxes that already exist. And there you might be able to see the problem with paradoxes. The paradox that might say, well, it belongs into this box and it also belongs into that one. And the brain says, well, hang on a second, which box shall I put it into then? And so that is one of the challenges. And just have a look at this slide. Now, again, I would like to see your faces and whether you can make sense of it. But if you read the words and then see the colors, is that easy? Or does your brain struggle for a moment and say, well, hang on a second, it says yellow, but it's actually petrol. And it says green, but it's actually red. So, what shall I do with that information? Shall I put it in the yellow box or in the green box, or in the red box, or in the blue box, or in the yellow box? So, if there's incongruency, our brain requires more energy to actually sort it out. So these two challenges we need to be aware of if we truly want to start embracing paradoxes, because I believe that once we are aware of them, we can have a different way of dealing with it. So, what are the paradoxes that I am observing? The first one I have alluded to a little bit, but for me, the first one is growth versus sustainability, at least how we currently understand it. Because growth traditionally is associated with the increase of GDP. And the increase of GDP is associated with increased productivity and output. And of course, that is requiring the input of resources. Yet, as mentioned before, the resources our planet has to offer are limited, and they are being depleted to a degree that is no longer sustainable. So how do we deal with this? I'd like to share a number of tools that have been developed over the last years that I believe start to help us get onto the right path. And you might be familiar with some of them. The first is the shift towards a circular economy. Whereas the last century's economic models and operating models of all of us have assumed that we can take resources, use them, and then chuck them away. And I still wonder how many of us are still in that frame of mind when we are buying, for example, clothing. We are buying clothing because it's cheap, we wear it, and then we throw it away. And actually, the textile industry is one of the biggest contributors to landfill. And many of the clothes have hardly been worn when they are being thrown out. And so what the concept of the circular economy suggests is that any resource, any natural resources that we are taking out of the Earth system, we are keeping in the cycle for as long as ever possible, which means that has huge implications for how we build stuff. That we build stuff in a way that we can disassemble it at the end and use the parts again, which makes it very unsustainable to use components or materials that you where you can't separate the elements out anymore, because it probably means you can't reuse them. It means recycling as much as possible in addition to reusing it, and only the limited, as little as possible, should go into landfill. And one of the guides and teachers we have on how to approach this is, of course, nature. If you think about nature, what is the waste of one cycle becomes the food for another cycle. And so understanding how nature does it certainly will help us to understand on how we, as economies, as individuals, can approach circularity. The second one, which is for me a next development following from this one, is Kate Raworth donut economics. And why I particularly like that one is because donut economics takes two things into consideration. A, the limited resources our planet has, which is it's referred to as the planetary boundary, which you might be able to see as the dark green circle. And there are also minimum requirements we as human beings have, in terms of food, in terms of shelter, and so on and so forth. So there are the social boundaries, which is the inner circle, the yellow inner circle. And the sustainable existence is within that donut. So between the green and the yellow circles, that is where we can live sustainably, with everyone being able to live a good life. And then there's a set of guiding principles that will also help us achieve that. And that is called natural capitalism. And actually that is almost 20 years, well, actually over 20 years out now. And there are 4 guiding principles of natural capitalism. The first one is radical resource productivity. So what does that actually mean? One example for me is that increasingly our shower heads, start one step back. All of us, when we have a shower, like to feel like we're really getting a nice strong shower. And being based in the UK, that certainly was not my experience when I first moved here. It was like you had to jump around in the shower tray in order to get wet, because the shower heads were dribbling rather than giving a shower, as the word implies. But of course, that is very water consuming, or consumes huge amounts of water. And so what the principle here says, so if you have to use water, make sure you use it in the most efficient way. And what people have done is very early on, they started to insert air jets into the water. so that the perception is that we have a nice strong shower, but the amount of water is reduced to up to 70%. So that's quite a significant reduction in water. And of course, nowadays we also have grey water gathering and grey water being used for watering plants or for flushing the toilet or other purposes. So if you have to use any natural resource, make sure you make most of it. And one of my favorite examples comes from a conversation with with an innovator from Unilever, who was in the was innovating around tea bags, believe it or not. And he was quite exasperated because he said, you know, if we can be as sustainable as we like with our tea bag, if everyone boils a full kettle of water to make 1 cup of tea, we will never win. So since then, I'm always measuring up my water in a jug, put it in the kettle, and then boil it rather than filling the cup and use whatever I need. A second principle of natural capitalism, which is my absolute favorite, and I've already alluded to a little bit with the concept of the circular economy, is biomimicry, learning from nature. And what you can see on this picture here is a termite mound. Why a termite mound? Well, the energy consumptions for cooling and heatings of buildings is one of the biggest cost factors over a lifespan of a building. And so some engineers thought, well, let's check out in nature. Maybe there is a structure where the temperature on the inside remains pretty stable despite high fluctuations of temperature on the outside. And they did find it in the aforesaid termite mound. And so what they did is they extracted the design principles of a termite mound and applied these design principles to a building in Harare in Zimbabwe. And the building they created uses 90%, that is 90, not 19, 90% less energy than a building of similar size without these design principles. So if we can look to nature, if we can learn from nature, there are a lot of solutions out there. We just need to find them and apply them into our context. And there's a wonderful website which is called Biomimicry 3.8. And I was just thinking, 3.8, what the heck's got that to do with anything? Until I realized that our Earth is 3.8 billion years old. So anything we find in nature has had 3.8 billion years to come to perfection. So surely there's something to be learned. The third principle is a shift from products to services. And why is that important? Well, one example is that Rolls-Royce, for example, has shifted from selling their engines to leasing their engines. Why does it make a difference? It does make a difference because when the engine goes wrong, it is not the customer who has to pay for the repair, but Rolls-Royce who has to set it right. And of course, that really focuses on quality and durability and longevity in quite a different way than if the customer has to pay for it. And a little picture here is to remind me to share the story of an US-based chemical company that was selling pesticides. And under their old business model, they were basically, the profit was driven by however much pesticides they could sell. So they probably sold much more than was actually required to manage the pests in the fields. Until someone said, what is it that our customers actually want? They don't want pesticide. They want pest-free fields. And so this company decided that's exactly what they were going to sell them. So they were selling them pest-free fields. And the beauty, of course, is that the pesticide became a cost to the company. And it was in their very best interest to use as little as possible, and so created winners all around. And then the final one is probably the most demanding and most difficult to realize, because it is about reinvesting in natural capital. And actually interesting, over the last few years, we've been seeing huge movements towards tree planting, which is reinvesting. Because if we don't, the consequences for nature, for human, for industry can be tremendous, as we have seen in many areas where river deltas have been straightened, where rivers have been cut off, and so on and so forth, which have left the surrounding areas either in floods or drying out. So reinvesting in natural capital, fortunately, seems to have moved up the agenda. So the point is, growth and sustainability are both necessary And so we should actually learn to do growth through sustainability and not against it. The second paradox is, again, I've mentioned that a little bit before, is the problem that people see when they say, what shall we focus on, operational excellence or innovation excellence? And you may know why there's a problem, you may not, but just think about it. Operational excellence is a particular cycle and innovation excellence is a particular cycle. And we need to ideally connect those. But when we are looking at the conditions in which operational excellence and innovation excellence thrive, they are actually really, really different. Just look at it. Operational excellence, you need focus on the detail. It works best if you've got rules and routines. It is focused on results. It's probably easy to delegate and control. It has norms and standards. If people all think the same, is really beneficial because no one is upsetting the apple cart. You can encourage it through rewards, and it is characteristics by certainty. You know exactly what you get. And it is about applying existing knowledge. Yet if you just have these rules or these conditions, you will never get innovation. You'll get innovation if you've got the opposite of that. If you're looking at the big picture and have a vision that takes you somewhere. If you experiment and if you try things out, if you're interested in the task itself rather than just the outcome. It requires individuals to take responsibility rather than expecting someone else to do it. It requires freedom, it requires time. It might benefit from guidelines to help you know which direction to go, but certainly doesn't benefit from rules. It is not possible without diversity. Recognition tends to be more important than reward, i.e. a pat on the back is much more work than a voucher for a book voucher for £10. It is, you're never quite sure what you get. So it is an approximation, and it certainly requires the taking of risk. If you're not taking any risks, you are probably not innovating. And if you look at it, what makes the operational cycle work and what makes the innovation cycle work, they are literally the opposites. And so no wonder there is a conflict. And we also know that this is in the management literature, the ability to do both is referred to as ambidexterity. So you can do the operational side with the left hand as well as you can do the innovation cycle with the right hand. However, the challenge is with ambidexterity is that the skills, mindsets, and competency needed for discovery and innovation are not only different from those needed for mass market optimization, they conflict. And so hence, that is a really tricky paradox to embrace. But of course, it's not impossible. And it becomes much more possible if you think about all the different types and levels of innovation that exist. Innovation is a huge word. And you have innovation in terms of products, services, processes. The beginning of this millennium, we started to talk about business model innovation. A little bit later, we started also to talk about social innovation, and now we are in the beginnings of talking about societal innovation. I also like to emphasize that we have always had all these types of innovation. What has changed is our desire to deliberately make them happen, rather than leave it to chance for them to occur. And then, of course, we've got different levels from incremental to radical to transformational. And if you now think about it, if you're in the bottom left corner in incremental product innovation, that is probably easily done with a few like-minded people who can sort it out. It can be dealt with by the R&D or marketing department if it is a more consumer-focused brand. If you are moving into processes, that already starts to touch more departments within an organization. If you're moving on to business model innovation, it is not only within the organization that the effects are being felt, but also in the collaboration with the outside world, how you engage with your customers, how you engage with your suppliers. And societal innovation is probably the most demanding ones in terms of how many people from different organizations and different mindsets are required. And what this also says is that in the incremental type of innovation, you're probably quite close to operational excellence. And in order to succeed as an organization, you need to play on the different aspects of this innovation scape. So what I'm saying is that rather than seeing operational excellence and innovating excellence as polar opposites, A, they are part of a spectrum, and B, in order to succeed, you definitely need both of them. And you need both of these skill sets to different degrees in different parts of this landscape. So what it is basically coming back to you need birds of all feathers in order to succeed. And one of the things that shifts is a focus from trying to make everyone more creative and innovative to helping each other to understand, or to help everyone to understand each other better and to appreciate each other more. Because I think that's where a lot of the conflict comes from, that, you know, if you are so different from me, then I don't quite like you and I don't understand why you want to look at the picture if I really need to focus on the detail. And there are a number of tools out there, just to show you a couple of them, that help people understand each other better, as well as their own contribution in the context, in the wider context. The one is called the Berkman method, which basically looks at the way we communicate and whether we are sort of more objective and subjective, which results in different categories, and each of them has a different focus. And then my absolute favorite one is called the 6 Eyes of Innovation, because that not only looks at the different process steps of an innovation journey, it also looks at the different mindsets that are required. And so it starts with the identifying opportunity, for which you need a lot of curiosity. And then you need a lot of passion in the ignite phase, which is about generating ideas where you need a lot of creativity. At the third stage, which is about investigation, which is challenging that the ideas that you have come up with, you need a critical mindset. In the fourth stage, you need a lot of courage, because that's where it comes to decision making and committing resources. The fifth stage is about implementing, where you need to be really truly committed, because before it was talking about stuff, and here it really is making it happen and making it real. And on the sixth stage, you need to be quite clever, which is where it is about how you can improve what you have created, because it's not having huge innovations all the time, but it's having a step change innovation and then making most of it by innovating incrementally around it. And if you look at these models, it is all about having people with different mindsets, bringing different things to the party at different stages of the journey. So that will help us to embrace the challenge, the paradox of operating and innovating much better. The third paradox I see is stability versus change. And I've already mentioned that change seems to be the order of the day, and we seem to be slipping into constant change without any stability. Yet I think there are also things that we need to keep stable if we don't want to slip entirely into chaos. But how do you know what to keep stable and what to change? Here, I think it is almost too easy, but I think it really works. Here, the trick is to think back from the future rather than forward from the present. What's the difference, you might ask? Thinking forward from the present is, if I'm asking you, what is 5 plus 5? Most likely the only answer is 10. If I say, however, how can we get to 10? Then the possibilities are absolutely limitless. If you put fractions into it and whatever, it becomes even more, it definitely is absolutely limitless. And so if you are thinking about where do we want to be, where do we have to be at some point in the future, what's the future look like, what is our role in such a future, that will help you to then look back from the future and say, okay, if this is where we ought to be in the future, let's look back what we've already got that helps us get there. And that also helps us to decide what we need to cast aside and what we need to acquire in addition to what we have already got. So actually, I don't think it is quite as difficult as it might initially sound, and not as contradictory. The fourth paradox then is one of competition versus collaboration. And I'm very pleased to say that I think there's maybe, at least to a degree, there are pockets where this has been realized and where collaboration is coming closer to the fore. And why is that beneficial? Well, first of all, if we are thinking as the challenges that we as humanity are facing, Not one individual, certainly, not one organization, not even one country will be able to address these alone. We can only address these challenges if we collaborate. And this is why I find it so heartening that the United States will not or will return to the climate table, that they will not leave the World Health Organization, because the only way to succeed is through collaboration. Only when you've got a seat at the table can you be part of the discussion. And if you're closing your front door thinking that will save you, I think that's probably the worst thing that you can actually do. And so some people might think about, sharing confidential information might be like giving away your crown jewels. But many of you will be familiar with the concepts of open innovation or crowdsourcing. And one very powerful example is from an organization called Goldcorp. It's not a made-up name; it's indeed the name. Where a new CEO had come in and was tearing his hair out because they had a plot of land where everyone was convinced that there should be gold, but whatever they did to find it, they were not successful. So probably because the CEO did not originally come from the mining industry, he put all the mining data that they had collected in their attempts to find the gold. He made all that data available online and put out a prize of $1 million to say, help us find or tell us where we should look for the gold. And people from all over the world downloaded the data set and started analyzing it and so on and so forth. And what they got back was a pot of gold indeed, because out of the four out of the 5 top sites that had been identified through this crowdsourcing, through this open innovation exercise, they actually found gold and were able to pay more than pay or recoup the money they had put out for this collaboration, or for this making the crown jewels available. So it is really rethinking is what do we really need to retain, and where can we open up, and also very often when you open up, if you actually, in the context of sustainability, if you are picking a topic that is of wider interest, that is addressing one of humanity's challenges, the chances are that you are striking up entirely new collaborations, as Nike experienced when they started to think about how they could apply their expertise to address obesity, came up with a fuel ban. The fuel ban then generated data that made them of interest to insurance companies, and sort of lots of new collaborations came out of that desire to look beyond the company profit and collaborate rather than compete. I've got 2 more, and they shouldn't take too long. Another one is the discussion that we seem to want to have everything as simple as possible. Yet another consequence of the conditions of the 21st century, of the increased connectivity, of the increased pace of change, is that we are living in a world that is so much more complex than anything that we have experienced before. Now, again, you might say, why does it matter? Well, let me start by sharing what I mean by this. So if we've got a scenario that is complicated, like the system here, if we study it hard enough and long enough, we will be able to understand it. And what is more, by understanding how it has worked in the past, we will reliably be able to predict on how it will behave in future. If, however, we are looking at a complex system, however much we study it, and even if we understand its behavior in the past, it will be next to impossible to predict how it will behave in the future, because we cannot predict how the individual actors in a complex network will work, with whom they will connect, what these connections will lead to, and so on and so forth. And so while we might desire simplicity, I believe that we can only achieve complicity if we embrace and understand complexity as much as possible. And I still haven't found a better example than Apple. which with its iPhone and iPad have achieved a level of simplicity of the interface, which is beyond anything that we had previously experienced. And underneath it is a whole level of complexity and interactions and connections, which we don't see. So it is the ability to achieve simplicity relies on a willingness and ability to embrace underlying complexity. And then the final point, the final paradox I have is that it sometimes seems, what is your mind telling you? What is your heart telling you? And I think that is probably one of the biggest challenges for us and for education, as education seems to emphasize the mind and very often ignores the heart. And there's this wonderful quote from Einstein, who said, sort of, your mind, your intellect can only get you so far. Creativity to your imagination can get you everywhere, or anywhere rather. And I think particularly in the Western world, our emphasis has been so much on the rational, on the mind, that we forgot to listen to our inner voice. We always have to have a justification. We have to have the numbers and figures and petto in order to say why we have made a particular decision. Yet if you think about the biggest decisions we make in life, whether it is buying a house or getting married, I wonder how many of us really, when we make the decision, certainly with the marriage, and I also believe when buying a house, will be based on our intuition. It just feels right. In particular with a house, then we sit down and say, oh, there are all of these reasons why this is the right decision. And, or if someone is passionate about cars, you will find a lot of reasons why that particular car, even though it's a sport car and he's just started a family and, whatever it is, they will find reasons and arguments why it is a rational decision. And here I'd just like to invite us all to acknowledge how much we are emotional beings, how much emotions are driving our thinking and decision making. Because I believe if we're allowing that, if we're accepting that, if we're acknowledging that, I think a consequence will be that our decisions will be more rational. So I believe that really, we can only succeed that if we have heart and mind engaged, is that we can actually achieve results. And I also think it's not only me who's saying that, because we know from engagement surveys and engagement that there are two aspects to engagement. Engagement requires a rational, or if we want high levels of engagement, two things need to be at play. The rational argument, which is about me understanding on how I can contribute to what the company is trying to achieve, and an emotional one, feeling pride of being part of that journey, feeling pride of being associated with it. And maybe I should also mention that year after year, global engagement surveys come back with a level of engagement that tells us that only about 17% of employees are actually positively engaged in the workspace. Most of them are just doing job to whatever is required. And about 17% are positively destructive in the workplace because they are disengaged. So they are sabotaging in certain ways the work or the organization they are working for. So it is definitely one or other is not enough. We really need to find ways to engage everyone, heart and mind. One final thought is, I think with paradoxes, it is a little bit like embracing paradoxes is a little bit like martial arts, where you use the force of your opponent to redirect it into creating something else. So you don't want to face it head on, but you want to sort of find a way that goes a little bit around it. Or maybe a much more beautiful picture is if you want to spot a particular star in the sky and that star is not very, very forceful, if you look directly at it, you can't see it. But if you look slightly next to it, you probably can. So with that, I would like to thank you very much and hand over to questions if there are any. And I will attempt to bring you onto my screen so I can actually see you.
If anyone has any questions for Bettina, feel free to unmute your mic and ask her directly.
Well, I'm still trying to formulate it in my mind, so it's gonna take a minute. Yeah.
That's very good because it gives me a chance to drink a bit of water.
Nice.
And if there aren't any questions, that's fine too.
It's a
You don't
deep
have to
concept,
make
so deep thoughts to formulate a question.
yes. It is also quite beautiful just to be in each other's presence with silence for a little while. We don't have that very often either.
Is it okay if I ask a very simple question as we wait for Noja?
Any question is welcome.
Okay, so I was wondering if there are any comprehensive sources that could show us how the world is making strides across all sectors. So it would be like economics, health, education, and how all these areas can be brought together to formulate kind of a master plan, a sustainable master plan for the world. Because I know
Well,
so
that
many
is
sectors, sorry, yeah, so
no,
many
no, please go.
have their individual research, but is there any comprehensive research being done?
Well, I'm not. Well, the one thing that came to mind straight away, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals that are aiming to provide some anchor points, some magnets to which where things are being collated, and I think some from the websites. But you're talking specifically about research, and
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure how much there is at that level. I think you're probably right. It's well, I still think things like the Sustainable Development Goals, like the donut from the donut economics, which has got a number of aspects around its circle, which are the social aspects are on the inside, and the environmental aspects are on the outside, and you can look at how we are performing against it. For example, the city of Amsterdam is using the donut. They are aiming to create themselves as a donut economy. And I think there are a couple of other examples. I would think that might be at least a starting point to looking for these things.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
No, just while you have it, we also have another question on the chat.
No, sure. Just go on with the chat. It's just like she answered most of the subjects I wanted to ask about, so
Okay, your train of thought went there.
yeah.
Cool. Then Bettina, we have another one on the chat. It's about how paradox effect on brain neuroleptic powers enhances your ability to observe real world phenomenon with regards to reality.
Oh, what a wonderful question. I think the short answer is I believe that if we allow paradoxes to exist, it will open our eyes in many ways, because we are not looking for one thing. And I would have loved to show a short video, which also demonstrates what happens when we just focus on one thing and we believe there's one thing we need to focus on, rather than allowing to open up and see what comes our way. So yes, I believe that being open to the existence of paradoxes, being open to the possibility that there's more than one right answer, will certainly open up our mind and will enable us to see the reality in a different way. I'm not quite sure whether that's answering the question already, or whether you'd like to, whoever's asked the question would like to expand a little bit.
Vikrant, or would you like to say anything else regarding the question, or okay, he got the answer. Perfect. Brilliant.
Okay, good. I mean, maybe just sort of another thought on it. I think this is why meditation is also quite powerful, because you are trying to empty your mind, so you are open to what is, rather than what you project, if that makes sense. So if you just try to empty your mind as much as possible, then hopefully also all the filters that we have are coming a bit more permeable, and we can see beyond those filters. There's this wonderful saying by the French authoress Anaïs Nin, who said, "We don't see things how they are, we see things how we are." Meaning that all of us have our own lenses of perception, and we know what's possible and what isn't possible. So therefore, we don't see what we believe isn't possible, and so on and so forth. So yeah, maybe that to round up that question.
Actually, by mentioning perception, you reminded me of a question I wanted to ask, which is a little controversial.
Go ahead.
Sure. So I noticed that in the United States and, well, everywhere around the world generally, certain research labs and certain even like general areas, like states in the USA, have started legalizing psychedelic drugs, what they're called. And they started utilizing them to research, like, for example, altered states of mind in relation for depression, addiction, PTSD, and other like abnormal states of your mind. Well, for example, in addiction rates, I think they tried to test with smokers and alcohol addicts. And after a single dosage in the experiment, around 80% of the people just abstained from what they previously, like, they smoked or drank. After that, they just like completely changed. So as you said, like, maybe just changing your perception towards reality can change you as a person in general.
Yeah, I can. The image that came to me was sort of, like being a hamster on a wheel. Once you're on a wheel, you don't seem to be able to get off, which is the current state of mind. And then someone pushes you out of the wheel through this psychedelic drug, and you all of a sudden say, "Whoa!" And you can see the wheel for what it is, because at that moment you're no longer part of it. So it makes perfect sense to me that it is possible. And yeah, thank you for that.
Does anyone else have any other questions for Bettina? No? Vale. Perfect. Mira, there's one. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Vikrant. Does the human race need to be more recognizant towards our future isotopes of time fraction with respect to our actions?
Can I just ask you to expand a little bit on that one, because I'm not entirely sure I'm quite getting it yet. I'm sorry. You could just expand a little bit. I just wonder whether I can see now that I'm.
Yeah, if you go there at the top, the square.
I just want to say, if I stop presenting, and then I go to the questions. Does the human race need to be more towards our future? Can you just explain a little bit more about, what do you mean by future isotopes of time fraction? Is it possible that you can explain a little bit more what you mean by that?
Vikrant, if you feel more comfortable. Yeah. Oh, he answered.
Oh, in terms of so let me just check in whether I understand it then correctly. So are you asking on whether we need to be more careful with technology, or would that be a right way of phrasing it? I just want to make sure I've okay, yeah. Oh, I absolutely think so. I absolutely think so. I think one of the big challenges I see is that technology is evolving much faster than humanity's ability to understand it, to develop morals and laws for it, I feel very often that we are opening Pandora's box, and we will not be able to, once it's out there, we can't take it back. And I don't think when we are developing technology, we are asking enough sides of what I call the dark side of innovation. And I think we are getting so excited by what is possible that we don't ask whether it's actually beneficial and desirable from a bigger systems perspective, from the planet's perspective, from humanity's perspective, from nature's perspective. So I absolutely think we need to become more critical of nature, and we should try to educate, bring up our children in a way that is better able and capable of being reflective of technology and understanding it and challenging each other. I'm always getting very nervous when I hear the slogan "technology will save us," because I'm more inclined to think that technology will enslave us if we are not careful. And the two images that I always use is the image of the movie The Matrix, where humanity has become subservient to technology. And for me, the alternative to that one is the movie Avatar, which for me is symbolic of living with and through nature. And of course, the whole approach is about biomimicry, and partially also the idea, the concept of circular economy, are much more closer to say, how can we live in better harmony with nature, which we've tried to dominate for such a long time. And with all the floods and hurricanes and what fires that we see, I feel, and the virus not least, I feel that nature is showing us, well, listen, humanity, you think you are in control of everything. Let me show you, you are absolutely not. I'm not quite sure whether that answered your question though, but you definitely got me off on a nice tangent there about technology. Great.
Perfect. Thanks, Bettina. Does anyone have any final thoughts or comments, questions? No? Vale, perfect. Then thank you, Bettina, so much. It was very insightful. I'm sure everyone here enjoyed it. Thank you for joining us on the Unlock Your Mind session.
Thank you.
Stop recording now.